All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a highly analytical, extremely precise look at a case that is literally redefining the music industry's legal boundaries. We're looking at a situation where a massive cultural moment collides head-on with the rigid, complicated walls of the American legal system.
When a rap feud reaches unprecedented commercial heights, the legal battleground moves to corporate recording contracts and defamation law. We are opening with this exact thought because today we are stripping away all the tabloid gossip, the social media noise, and the fan debates. We are here to examine pure, unadulterated legal precedent. You see, this isn't about who won a rap beef. It's about how the law handles the actual monetization of artistic conflict.
So here's our docket for today's explainer. A systematic breakdown of the courtroom mechanics that separate artistic expression from defamation. We'll map out the corporate triangle, dissect the specific legal claims, review the pivotal district court precedent, and finally, unpack that ongoing 2026 appeal. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The Corporate Triangle.
To really understand this lawsuit, we first have to establish the bizarre corporate reality at play here, because honestly, the structure of the modern music industry is exactly what makes this case so unprecedented. Get this, Drake isn't actually suing his rival Kendrick Lamar over the track Not Like Us. Nope, he is suing Universal Music Group, or UMG. UMG is the massive parent corporation that distributes music for both of these artists. Drake is signed under UMG's Republic Records division, while Kendrick releases music through an exclusive licensing deal with UMG's Interscope division. So what we have here is a massive corporation profiting from a feud between two of its own biggest stars.
In his legal filings, Drake presents what we can call the leverage theory. He alleges that UMG strategically weaponized a defamatory narrative to decrease his bargaining power for an upcoming 2025 contract renewal. According to his complaint, UMG had just signed Lamar to a short-term exclusive contract and was basically desperate to prove their promotional value to lock Lamar into a long-term deal. So Drake's team argues that UMG saw an opportunity to heavily promote a track filled with severe accusations to maximize Lamar's sales, and they willingly sacrificed Drake's brand leverage in the process.
Section 2. The legal claims. So how exactly does an artist sue their own label for a song released by a competitor? In this initial January 2025 filing in the Southern District of New York, the focus shifts entirely to corporate accountability. Exhibit A of the petition points directly to UMG's role as the distributor. Drake's lawyers argue that UMG had exclusive control over the licensing of the song. They could have refused to release it, they could have demanded the offending material be edited out. But instead, they allege UMG designed, financed, and executed a plan to turn the song into a viral mega-hit.
The crucial point here is that Drake leveled three distinct claims against his label. First up, defamation. He argues UMG knowingly published false statements that caused severe reputational harm. Second, harassment, specifically under New York penal law, claiming the release and promotion resulted in physical threats and online harassment without any legitimate purpose. And third, this one's super interesting, deceptive practices. Drake's team alleged that UMG used covert manipulation, basically illegal payola, to artificially inflate the song's radio airplay and stream counts.
But here is the massive legal hurdle. Because Drake is an international public figure, he faces a very heavy burden, proving UMG acted with actual malice. Established decades ago in the landmark Supreme Court case New York Times versus Sullivan, this standard means Drake cannot just prove the lyrics are false. He actually has to prove that UMG published them knowing they were false or with a reckless disregard for whether they were true or not. That is a very high bar to clear.
Before we dive into the judge's decision on all these claims, we have to pause and ask ourselves a really fundamental question. Where does the law draw the line between artistic hyperbole and legal defamation? Like, how does a reasonable listener actually interpret a rap feud that's playing out across streaming platforms and social media?
Section 3. The Precedent.
In October 2025, U.S. District Judge Jeanette Vargas handed down a ruling that established a major First Amendment precedent, and she dismissed the case entirely. She ruled that in the context of a heated, 16-day, 7-track rap battle, the lyrics function purely as rhetorical hyperbole. The court found that the song must be viewed in its appropriate factual context, not in isolation. Basically, a reasonable listener knowing full well they're listening to a diss track would not perceive the lyrics as conveying verifiable objective facts. And the judge's wording here brilliantly illustrates the court's view. Judge Vargas noted that the song is replete with profanity, trash-talking, threats of violence, and figurative and hyperbolic language. The court's stance is pretty clear. The average listener simply does not expect fact-checked, verifiable reporting from a rap beef. To the court, treating a diss track like a literal confession or a factual news report completely ignores the fundamental nature of the genre. As legal scholars have pointed out while analyzing this dismissal, ruling in favor of defamation here would require totally divorcing the art from the theatrical context of hip-hop braggadocio. Plus, the judge also pointed out that Drake willingly participated in this exact same context. He hurled his own severe accusations in previous tracks and even used an AI-generated voice of Tupac Shakur to goad Lamar into a response. The court essentially said, hey, you both willingly stepped into the arena of rhetorical hyperbole.
Section 4. The 2026 Appeal. Now, the legal maneuvering absolutely did not stop at the district court level. The stakes were just way too high for this to end quietly. Let's look at the timeline. After that October 2025 dismissal, Drake's legal team escalated the battle. By January 2026, they had filed a massive 117-page appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. UMG fired right back with their own 83-page response in March, and by April 2026, all the briefings were completed, totally setting the stage for a critical appellate review.
Up at the appellate level, Drake's team introduced this really fascinating legal theory: republication. They argued that, okay, even if the song started as a rap battle, UMG committed new actionable offenses by republishing the song in massive mainstream venues that are far removed from that original context. They pointed to the song being played at political rallies, winning at the Grammy Awards, its performance at the Juneteenth Pop-Out concert, and crucially, Lamar performing it at the Super Bowl halftime show. Drake argues these arenas strip away the rap battle context entirely, which then makes those accusations legally actionable.
In response, the court saw a wave of amicus briefs, friend of the court filings, from various legal scholars. Groups like the iPate Clinic and Yale Law scholars stepped in to defend rap as creative expression. They warned the Second Circuit that treating rap lyrics as literal statements of fact introduces severe racial bias right into the courtroom. They strongly argued that ignoring the historic, defiant, and boastful artistic conventions of hip-hop effectively criminalizes black creativity and sets a highly dangerous precedent for free speech.
Meanwhile, UMG fired back fiercely in their appellate brief. They straight up labeled the lawsuit an affront to all artists and their creative expression. UMG's lawyers called Drake's appeal astoundingly hypocritical. They pointed out that he willingly provoked and participated in the feud using the exact same UMG distribution platforms to launch severe, unverified allegations at Lamar, but is now weaponizing the legal system simply because he lost the cultural battle.
As we await the appellate court's decision, it really leaves us wondering, how will future legal frameworks handle the unprecedented monetization of artistic conflict? If the Second Circuit upholds the dismissal, it cements the protection of diss tracks under the First Amendment. But if they reverse it, well, that could fundamentally alter how record labels clear, distribute, and promote music that targets specific individuals. The lines between art, hyperbole, and corporate liability have literally never been more blurred.
This case is far from over, and whatever the outcome, it's going to send shockwaves through the entire entertainment industry. Subscribe to track legal developments in music, and we'll see you in the next explainer.